Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Well, I'm very grateful to have as a guest on this particular segment of the Gospel at Work an old friend who has been a podcaster for many, many years. I've been a guest on his podcast from time to time, and who serves as the unofficial, not for the unofficial Bible, the unofficial Department of Bible chair at Rock County Christian School, where he teaches the Bible classes and the civics classes. Also, Kevin, you have, I know, run for public office.
Right.
By the way, Kevin Thompson, welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry for that backwards introduction. You're here this time to talk about the gospel at work. And as I mentioned to you in the email that I sent to you, not too long ago, I had as a guest Tom Graham. And Tom is a school teacher like you are, but he teaches in the public schools. You have the blessing of being able to teach in a place where Christianity and the Bible is absolutely fair game.
Right.
But you also perhaps maybe have a little bit more of a struggle with, how do I put this? I don't know, kids that are maybe almost immunized against the Christian faith because they're...
Yeah. I mean, you got kids here who have been in church since the womb, and they know the right words to say. They know the lingo. They know the songs. And so a lot of this is just rote for them. So, yeah, that's definitely a danger that we have to address. But on the high school level, it's fun teaching because some of those kids are just at the point where they're noticing that about themselves. And they're realizing, they're asking those questions, is this stuff real or is this just how I was raised? And, they're trying to separate themselves from their parents' faith. So that really makes my job fun.
Well, and it's a real phenomenon. I remember years ago, I gave a commencement address at a classical school in Cincinnati. And every one of the graduates, I think there were 6 of them, were invited to give a little speech, and every single one of them, one, thanked their parents for raising them in the faith, but 2, turned around and almost sort of disowned that.
Right.
Which, again, I understand the impetus behind it, but it was a little bit weird. I was like, okay, I get this, you need to own it, but do you need to disown your parents to do it?
Right.
So there you are, you're teaching, and I know you have a heart for these kids. I know that you have a zeal and a passion to help them embrace a sound biblical worldview. But I also know you well enough, Kevin, to know that you're also aware of the danger of sort of looking at Christian growth as the ability to add more information.
Right.
So I'm curious, when you look at yourself in that classroom as a sinner saved by grace, how does that impact how you interact with, first, let's say, your students?
Sure. Well, I consider myself to be an open book. I'm a pretty transparent guy. And I want to be honest, and it took me a while to get to this point, but I want to be honest about my own sin.
Right.
Because that's one of the things these kids are struggling with, and I think Christians in general struggle with, is that you want to project that certain image of,
oh my, yes,
you know what you should be doing, and you know what you should be looking like. And so we have a lot of kids who obey the rules, and they look the part, they get the straight A's and whatnot. But they're also the ones who, at lunchtime, it's a joke now. But if I have a kid who comes into my room at lunchtime and looks around and says, Mr. Thompson, do you have a second? And it's all secretive. I'm just going to say, all right, well, come on in. Let's talk about your porn habit. You know, because these kids they're struggling with sin, but they think that they're the only one because everybody else is trying to project that same image that they're trying to project.
Right.
And there's a shame and embarrassment. And of course, there should be shame and embarrassment over sin. But I like Luther's quote about sin boldly.
Yes.
That our sin ought to be out in the open, in the sense not that we're proud of it, but we want to be honest about it, because when it's out in the open, that's when we can actually deal with this. So I try to share my struggles and share some of my issues that I go through. I recently, you might know, just last year I had a toe amputated because of some ramifications of an uncontrolled diabetes that I have. And, you know, food is a problem for me, and health is an issue for me. And a lot of that is a sin issue. And I try to be transparent about that with the kids and tell them, listen, I've messed up. And not just in that area, but in so many other areas. And I think that allows them the freedom to say that about themselves, whether it's a porn habit or whether it's even struggles with the faith. Is this real? Is this something that I embrace myself? And so I really try to bring in the gospel through the reality of sin, that we're all depraved, and none of us are not just perfect, but none of us are even close. And so we need the gospel. It's not just something for those outside, you know, for those really bad people,
right,
who go to the public school system or whatever. It's for us here. And your Bible teacher is, you know, I can identify with Paul. I'm the worst of sinners. I'm the foremost here.
Well, I think your students are blessed to hear that. I am completely with you on the broader church, not just kids, not just Christian school kids. We all have this propensity to project this image, and it is just so absolutely foolish. And I think it's sadly an unintentional, implicit denial of the gospel.
Yes.
That the only way, well, if you can't own your sin, then Jesus can't own your sin.
Right.
You know, if you are too afraid to say, this is me, this is what I've done, this is who I am, then Jesus won't be able to say, I've got it covered.
Right. We don't have that dependency upon him that we need. It leads to arrogance and a false sense of pride that cripples us as Christians. It takes us further away. Just like, you know, just as Paul said in Philippians 2, that, you know, he goes through his list of things that he should be proud of, and at least maybe other Pharisees would. But he says, no, I count all those things as loss, because they actually drew me away from Christ instead of bringing me to him.
Absolutely right. And, you know, I've told many people one of the blessings, a deep blessing of having very public scandal like I have in my life is it makes it impossible to pretend.
Right.
It's even if I have the temptation to go out and project, I'm not fooling anybody anymore.
Yeah.
And what you have is the grace of God pulling idols out of our hands, including the idol of our reputation. And, you know, unfortunately, it doesn't, I don't think, really silence the devil. It should. You know, when this is very Luther-esque, when the devil accuses me, the right answer is, you don't know the half of it. You're
right.
I don't know the half of it, but the one who does know all of it loves me. So what are you going to do with that? But he keeps badgering, and it's almost the case that I can't go through a day without somebody somewhere on the internet saying, yeah, well, you did this.
Right.
And that's okay. That's
Right.
okay, because I don't need other people to not think I did that or to not forgive me for what I did do,
Right.
because the one that matters does count. So again, it sounds like your students are really blessed by your honesty. Let me ask you this.
I don't know if they agree with that. We just had final exams. They don't feel blessed by me at all right now. So.
Well, do you think, have there been occasions where not only have you had to come in front of them and say, away from you, I have this sin issue that's really not related to you. It's a very different thing from saying, here, I've sinned against you.
Yeah.
Maybe I've lost my temper. Maybe I've judged you too quickly. Maybe I shared something you brought to me in confidence someplace I shouldn't have. Have you had those kinds of conversations?
Yeah, it sounds like you've been in my classroom. I definitely, one of the things I struggle with, one of the sins I struggle with is anger, and it doesn't take a lot to frustrate me. And my students know that. And there are times I've got to say, listen, guys, all right, let's stop here. I'm getting really upset, and I shouldn't be. This is on me, not on you. And I've had to apologize for that. And there have been times, it's easy to judge students or pigeonhole them into, okay, this is the good kid, this is the bad kid, this is,
Right.
In fact, I can think of an example right now of a kid who felt like he was being targeted. And I can see why, because, I mean, quite frankly, he was guilty of a lot of stuff.
Right.
But because of that, it's easy to think when anything goes wrong, you look at him first.
Right.
And I had to go to him at one point and say, listen, you know what? That's wrong. If you knew half of the stuff I did, you'd know we're on the same level here. We're sinners saved by grace. And, and I've had to apologize to certain stuff to get a student right now who just really irritated me. And I let him have it because he had it coming. It was building up, and it felt good to just unleash on this kid. And almost immediately after, I was like, oh man, how could I let myself do that? And so actually when I talked to him after that, I apologized to him, and we actually had a better relationship after that moment. And he had told me, he said, Mr. Thompson, I've had a lot of teachers yell at me, but you're the only one that actually apologized for it.
Uh-huh.
And so, we were able to build off of that mistake. So yeah, it certainly happens, and it's not fun. I don't love apologizing to people,
right?
And trying to make things right and asking for forgiveness, but that's the biblical thing to do.
Amen. Well, now I'm going to really push you here and ask you about what I suspect is the most difficult relationship that a Christian school teacher has, and ask you to segue away from your relationship with the students to your relationships with their parents. How does the gospel impact your interactions with mom and dad?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been teaching now for almost 20 years. It's only been the past 7 or so that I've had children, and these past 7 years have been quite eye-opening.
Uh-huh.
My wife and I like to joke we were perfect parents until we got kids,
right?
Because we knew, because it's easy to ascribe, you got the kid who's got behavior issues. Well, obviously he's not disciplined at home. That's right. Got to be the deal. And now that I've got kids of my own, it's like, I want to write letters of apology to several parents.
Right.
But I will say I am blessed at our school. We've got some really great parents who just get it. They get their kids, and they get the difficulty of our job as well, and we really do partner together. But there are times when misunderstandings come in, and sometimes some parents are more difficult than others, and I've got to realize, I've become one of the parents of one of those kids.
Right.
And so I'm trying to put myself more into their shoes and realize that, every kid is different. Not every kid responds as they have been raised.
Right.
And that's not necessarily the problem of the parent. but I also recognize, that there's the old expression about hurt kids, or hurt people, hurt people.
Right.
And some of these families are going through things that I never would have guessed. And so a lot of that, it has to be relational. When you get to know these kids, get to know the families, and you realize the struggles they're going through, sometimes I've got to, maybe it's not the biggest deal in the world that this kid, didn't bring his textbook to class because he hasn't eaten in 3 weeks or something, and, when I sometimes, I'll have parents who are having marital struggles as well, sometimes abusive situations, and getting to know them helps us to get to know the students more, and just trying to be a lot more understanding in that area.
Right. Well, and I think that's another fruit of this failure that we have to be open and honest and vulnerable
Right.
with each other. You just get this great gap between the image and the reality,
Yeah.
and that creates a momentum to continue to hide the reality.
Right.
And then when sort of the reality sort of seeps through, the cracks, there it is. I mean, it's hard to understand because we don't know what's going down under the roots.
One of the issues that we've come into contact, we found that transparency now is a must, and it's been forced upon us because now we have kids in our school system, and these kids are very honest and open about what goes on at home, especially when you get the kid in kindergarten. And we're talking with the kindergarten teacher who's a friend of mine, and she'll tell me, "Well, guess what I found out about you guys today." So,
it's such a what's the word for it? A widespread problem in the evangelical church, and there seems to be so few people that are sort of zealous to address it and deal with it.
Right.
How about, as we're starting to run out of time here a little bit, how does the gospel impact your relationship with your peers and your coworkers there at the school? Is this a school that is, well, maybe I shouldn't ask it this way. How does the gospel impact your relationship with your peers?
Yeah, I've got some great coworkers who we band together, pray together, and they get it. We're kind of going through the same struggles, and I will say I've got a principal now who's leaving. At least he thinks he's leaving. He's tried this before and it didn't work, but and he's got a very open door policy. If I'm struggling in something, he can, I can walk in there and say, "Hey, listen, I messed this up." Whether it was I remember my first year at this school, I just completely lost it over a class. I had to walk it out while the kids were still in, and it was just, but there wasn't a judgment there so much as well, you got to get back in, and you got to work on some stuff.
Step one.
But let's do this together. Let's work on this together. And so I have really been blessed by the leadership at our school in that regard. It's not a heavy-handed leadership at all. It's leadership. I mean, there certainly has been times where I've been called out, and I need to have been. But I also know my coworkers are there for me as well. And I hope they think the same about me. That they are willing. We'll get together and pray. We pray as a staff, but also individually. I know. A couple of teachers I can depend upon. They've got my back, and I can go in, whether it's sometimes just to spout off about something, or sometimes, "Hey, listen, hey, I'm having trouble at home. Can you pray with me over this? My relationship with my wife isn't what it should be, and can you, I just need someone to talk to you about this." And so it's really been great to go through that. So I have not just coworkers, but friends and just fellow laborers in the gospel.
Well, and I think that it helps, Kevin, for you to actually look at it that way. And that's one of the reasons why we do this whole segment, to help everybody understand, whatever their job is, that's what they are co-laborers in the gospel. Again, for some, it's a little bit easier to see. Being a teacher in a Christian school, it might be easier to see than, say, my friend Josh Smithson, who owns a company that does steam cleaning of carpets and ducts. Not D-U-C-K-S, D-U-C-T-S. Right. I don't think there's much call for steam cleaning D-U-C-K-S.
I hope not.
Yes. But, to his credit, he sees it the same way. By the way, you guys kind of look alike. You and my friend Josh, a couple of good-looking guys. Well, I got to tell you, Kim, there are times when I think of you, I pray for you, I think of you in your classroom. You are an encouragement to me to know, hey, there's this good guy up there, not far from me, who gets the gospel and who is fighting the good fight and has that humility. And I mean, you really are. You're like, when I used to go travel across the world, rather, one of the great blessings was discovering how God was at work in places I had no idea. And even here, it's so encouraging to me to know that God's at work in your classroom and at Rock County Christian School.
Let me say, your ministry has been a great blessing to me, whether it's the podcast, YouTube videos, blog posts. I often read them, and they're just refreshing to my soul. So I thank you for that.
Well, and again, I think it's the same thing, that when we find our refreshment in the gospel, we're able to bring that refreshment to others. I used to feel somewhat apologetic about beating the same drum over and over again. And I would defend myself with that quote from Luther when the lady said, "Brother Luther, why do you keep preaching the same sermon every week?" And he said, "Because you keep forgetting every week."
Right.
And the reality is I keep forgetting every week.
Yeah.
And so I need to hear the assurance of my Heavenly Father's love for me because of the fullness of Christ's work on my behalf. Because
I've heard the same thing when people talk about the Lord's table.
Yeah.
You really do that every week? Yes, I need it. Doesn't it get rote? Doesn't it just get ritualistic? Well, I tell you, that's more on you than on the sacrament. I need that reminder, and I crave that reminder every week. I can't wait to get to the table.
Yeah, if you are constantly reminded of your own sin, you will not grow weary of being reminded of Christ's provision.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much. I don't know in what context I'm going to ask you to come back, but I'm going to ask you to come back at some point.
As long as you come back on my podcast,
absolutely,
we get a deal.
Fair's fair. Well, and I'm going to encourage people, please be in prayer for Kevin and for his family and for Rock County Christian School. And again, look forward to having you on again.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.